Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. We are just rolling out of 2021, getting ready to roll into 2022. I'm ready for a new and different type of year. How about y'all? It's been a rough and bumpy couple of years now, hasn't it? It'll be interesting to see what 2022 has to offer. Today, I know one of the things that I want to talk to you about is year-end writing, which is something that I do almost every year. There have been a year or two where I haven't. And I want to tell you about what I do, and this is something that you can do, and the benefits of doing it. So I'm just curious to know, how did your holiday season go, whatever you celebrated? How's your energy? How's your burnout? How's your self-care? Holidays can be, it can be challenging, especially if you got family and travel, and then all of the new stuff that's going on with Omicron and the Delta variant. It's just been quite a ride, hasn't it? At the end of every year, I keep a folder on my computer, and there are different categories that I write about. But what I first do is I go back and I read the writing from the year before. Oftentimes what happens, at least for me, is I forget to kind of push back and see the bigger picture. And things that I'm currently struggling with is what's prominent in my mind, and that's what I'm focused on. And when I go back and do reading from last year, there are all of these things often that were issues that I just totally forgot about, and they're not issues anymore. I've moved away from them. I'm doing new and different things, and it really helps to provide perspective. I think sometimes our depth of processing, I see things very close up, and to be able to kind of push things back and see the bigger picture can really be helpful for me. And I think because we often have such deep feelings and responses to things, that things in the moment can feel very large and pressing. And when we kind of push it back, and I think about struggles that I'm having, and I think in the scheme of my entire lifetime, this is just a drop in the bucket, or this is just, one little tick on the timeline of my whole life. And that really helps to create a little bit of perspective. I'm going to tell you some of the categories that you can write about, but you can do whatever. You can just sit down and do writing. But I feel like it does help. And I don't write on all of these categories, but I did sit down to think about, you can write about your current relationship, or if you're not in a primary significant relationship, what is it that you would like to create in that relationship? Where are you at with your friendships? Do you have the type of friendships that you want? Are you wanting to have more friendships that have authenticity and vulnerability and intimacy, and that are reciprocal, and where you feel seen and heard? What about your living situation? Do you like where you're living? Is there something else that you want to create either in your current living situation, or that you want to create in your next living situation? Where are you at with your health? And this is not a time to degrade yourself or your body, but where are you at with your health, with movement? Are there things that you want to create more of? And I don't really believe in doing New Year's resolutions because I usually can't follow them, but I do like to talk about things that I want to create more of in the new year. And so, what would that look like for you? Do you want to have more meals at home? Do you want to change your eating in a certain way? Do you want to eat more vegetables, or make sure you're drinking more water? It's going to look different for everybody if you're thinking about turning into a certain type of eating or giving up certain foods. I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about a dieting mentality, restricting, but just looking at where is it that you want to create some goals or some movement or a direction to move towards. Where are you at with play and adventure? Is travel something that's important to you? And obviously, with where we're at right now with COVID, that may or may not be possible depending on where you're at. But what is it that you have to look forward to that's feeling fun and exciting? How about creativity? And you can write about where you've been this year and where you would like to go. And then once you do this in every year, you have something that you can build on. Where are you at with work and career? How about family? If you're parenting or you're taking care of aging parents, how's that going? And what do you want that to look like, or any shifts that you want to make? Where are you at with finances? And finances have been really helpful for me to look at because I really can see that over the years, I've made shifts in my thinking. If you're a new listener, you don't know this. My mom was a single parent growing up. We were on food stamps for a time. At one point, my mom would take cash and kept it in envelopes in the freezer. That was our budget for the month. And so I grew up being very, very, very mindful about money. It's been challenging for me as I've increased my earning and have more stability to know that it's okay for me to spend money. It's okay for me to have the things that I want. It's okay for me to have quality things. I think when we grow up with scarcity, it can be hard to expand, and there's no reason why I can't enjoy the things that I want if I have the money to afford them. And writing about this has been helpful to see how that's changed over the year. And it's a little ironic that this year my census for clients has been lower. I go through these phases where I get concerned, and I've earned more this year than I have in any year prior to this year. And so it's been really interesting that on one hand, I have that scarcity mindset that, my schedule hasn't been full and I've had room, which I've actually needed that time to work on some other projects. I have that fear of not having enough money, but if I look at the bottom line, I earn more this year than I have before. And that's where having tangible, measurable things to look at can really help, because I think it's not uncommon for us to have an internal perception of how we're doing or how people perceive us or how successful or effective we are. Yet, if we look at the external markers, we're doing okay. And I have a feeling that some of that has to do with childhood trauma, CPTSD, wounding, being the adult child of an emotionally immature parent. However you want to call it, I think often our internal experience is so different than the way that the world experiences us. And so anything that we can do to work on that to create more congruency can be really helpful and really healing. Where are we at with education? If you're a professional, is there more training that you want to get? If you're a student, where are you at in your education? Do you want to go back to school? Are there things that you want to learn about? And finally, spirituality, whatever that looks like to you. And that can also include time in nature and peaceful ways of relaxing, self-care. You can look at any of these things and do writing about where are you at now and where would you like to be. And then at the end of next year, you can go back and look at this and build on it. It can be very, very empowering. I know for me, one of the things that I'm feeling really pleased with this year is just where I've gone with my kayaking. And I don't view myself as being someone who's athletic or fit. When we talk about that internal narrative, I was always the chubby kid. My dad was always trying to get me to exercise, and it felt like it was to lose weight, not to enjoy moving my body. And when my dad left when I was 5, I figured it was because I was fat, and if I could just lose weight, he'd come back and love me, which is what kids do. They make up a story to fit the reality, as opposed to the fact that he just really wasn't qualified or capable of being a very consistent father. But I've carried that narrative of being the fat kid and being an adolescent who had terrible acne. My self-esteem really, really suffered. And this year has really been about changing my relationship with my body and movement and kayaking. And if you're a listener who's been following my story, I switched to using a sea kayak. I bought a sea kayak in October of this year, 2021. I use an app to track my miles when I kayak. And for November, I paddled 86.3 miles. I was really impressed with myself. And it's interesting that I was talking with a friend sharing about that and saying, I don't think I'm going to hit that level of miles again, because it was just, I did a lot of paddles that month. And she reflected to me that our society is so much about bigger and better and more that we get onto that loop of feeling like whatever we do isn't enough. And I really had an opportunity to see how this showed up for me, that I normally paddle with this group on Saturday, but they're doing ocean paddles. So I'm going to digress, and I hopefully will come back to all of this. A few weeks ago, we did a paddle up at Dana Point. I just started doing ocean paddles, and I used this transdermal patch, a seasickness patch. And when I've gone out with it once or twice, I've just used half of a patch, and it's worked. So I drove up to Dana Point, which is without traffic, it's an hour away. I drove up early on a Saturday morning. We launched, our intention was to go out and look for whales and dolphins. And we saw hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dolphins. If you follow me on Instagram at Unapologetically Sensitive, I posted a video. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. When I've gone out in the ocean before, it's been for about an hour. And when I paddled with this group, we went out for 3 hours and 20 minutes. We did 10.2 miles. Let me tell you, the sea patch seemed to work for 2 hours. And then I noticed myself feeling seasick. And the worst thing that I could imagine happened, that I was out in the middle of the ocean and I felt seasick. And what I learned is, I had an hour and 20 minutes where I had to paddle before we got back to shore. It wasn't fun. I wouldn't want to do it again. But if I had to, I know that I can do it. And then we went out to lunch. Once we got back to shore, I was fine. We went out and got a bite to eat. And then there was traffic. So it took me an hour and a half to get home. I sat in traffic for an hour. By the time I got home and we unloaded the kayak, it had been like a 9-hour day. And it was interesting. My husband said, if you could do it again, knowing how it was going to go, would you do it? And that's been a hard question. I don't regret going because I have never experienced seeing so many dolphins in my life. It was probably one of the most magnificent things that I've ever seen. And that made it totally worth it. And I felt like, I can get seasick out on the ocean. I can paddle for an hour and 20 minutes, and then I can sit in traffic for an hour and drive an hour and a half to get home. And I did it. And that was very empowering. I don't know if I could go into that again, knowing that that's what would happen, though. It's a really interesting question. So this group had another paddle coming up that they were going to go out in the ocean. And I just knew that I was not up to doing that. I'll need to try and use a full patch the next time I go with them. But I knew that it was going to be too much. But what I thought I would do was launch from the beach and then paddle over to where they launch from on the docks, which is about a mile. And I figure I would go down the channel with them. And then when they went out to the ocean, I would paddle back down the channel and then paddle around the bay and go home. But I knew I needed to get a paddle in. So I launched from the beach and went over to the docks. They were just getting there. And I think they were busy and preoccupied with what they were doing. So I did say hi to a few of them and I kind of hung around, but they were just getting there. And I thought, I don't really want to sit around in the water for a half an hour. And so I just took off to go do my own paddle. And I did about 3.4 miles. And so this is that place where I think you'll relate to. I was doing all of these mental gymnastics of like 3.4 miles is like nothing. It doesn't count. Most of my paddles are 6 or 7 miles. When I go out with this group, sometimes we'll do up to 10 miles. And I was just thinking like, it's not worth it. It doesn't even count for anything. And then I try and do 15 miles a week, which means about 5 miles per paddle. And I thought like, that's not going to count towards anything. And then I thought, oh, wait, it's Saturday. My weeks end on Saturday, and I'd already done, I think, a 6 and a 7 mile paddle. So it took me well over my 15 miles. I just watched myself do these mental gymnastics over, it's not enough. I'm not okay. Oh, but look, it does count this way. It doesn't count this way. I mean, the truth is, it really doesn't matter. And it was just fascinating to observe all of these ways that I seek validation and all of this stuff. And then it was really interesting. We did a paddle on Wednesday and had a little holiday get together. And I found out that on the Saturday paddle that I didn't go down the channel with them, that one of the experienced paddlers fell out of his boat. It just happens sometimes. He was close to the jetty, the way the waves were pulling. He's like, one minute he's in his boat and the next minute he's out of his boat. He ended up being rescued. It turned out fine. He was fine. He went on the paddle. But I really thought I was actually grateful that I wasn't there because I think that it would have activated my fear. And what I loved when this woman was telling the story is it happens to all paddlers. Like sometimes you're just in your boat and the next minute you're out of the boat and there's nothing to be embarrassed of, because this paddler who fell out of his boat was saying how embarrassed he was. And I've heard a number of people say like, it just happens. So when it happens, you just deal with it. Which is why the skills training that they do in the summer is so invaluable. And I'm really looking forward to when the weather warms up, being able to do that again. And I've thought about this before because Brenda and I go out and paddle on our own and we go out in the ocean. And if something happened, I don't know how to secure her boat and to pull the other kayak perpendicular over your boat. You tip it and dump the water out, and then you pull it up next to you and secure it while the person gets in. I'm already afraid of falling out of my boat, but those are important skills that I want to learn. The other interesting thing that I've noticed is, and it kind of bugs me, but I think it's just how it is. The last couple paddles that I've gone out on, I'm finding myself having that nervousness and insecurity when I launch. It's just there. I'm going to fall out of my boat and I don't feel as secure. And I've just learned to be with it and to not worry too much about it. And once we paddle to where we're paddling, I did notice on Wednesday that by the time we got there, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to turn around and go back. I didn't say anything. But once we started to turn back, then I feel more relaxed. And so just knowing that that just may be my pattern, or I may go through periods where I'm feeling a little bit more concerned about, my nervousness is there heading out on the paddle, and then heading back, I just feel more relaxed. It's just so interesting to be able to rumble with this. And I don't think that I've talked about this before, but a couple times when Brenda and I have gone up and down the channel before I went out in the ocean, the channel it moves a lot. And initially I did not like being in the channel, and we'd go out a certain extent and then I'd be like, okay, I've had enough. I want to turn around. And then I tell her, do you remember like the sound of Scooby-Doo when they're running away, that sound of the cartoon feet like that? I tell Brenda, it's like I notice I have my cartoon feet on and I just paddle because I just want to get out of the channel. And the first time I got, I don't know, maybe halfway back down, I thought, wait a second, what would it be like to just slow down and experience what it's like to experience the movement in the channel? And I was able to do that. And then we went in and out of the channel a couple times, and then we went out into the ocean the other day. And there's something that happens when there's a wave pattern that's not a rolling wave, but it feels like my hips are hula hooping. That's my expression. I don't know how else to call it. It's not a rhythmic motion, and it just feels like I don't have control over where my hips are. And I know that I need to relax, and I just have a hard time relaxing. So it's like when I'm out there and my hips are hula hooping, it's just not my favorite thing. And so we went out the channel and down past the Ocean Beach Pier. And then I'm like, I think I need to turn around. And we went back into where the jetty was. And then it's kind of funny because going into the channel where the jetty is, like that was kind of fun. It was a little bit more exciting. And then we paddled around the bay, and then the bay felt boring. So it just feels like it's just always something. And just learning how to sit with it, ride with it, move through it has been really a great experience. And the other thing that's been really interesting that I was really acknowledging myself for is we've been meeting at all these different places that, when I went to Dana Point, I had no idea where the place was. We launched off the beach at Shelter Island the other day. I'd never been there. All of these new places, and I like knowing where I'm going and where we're going to launch from and what it's going to look like. And I haven't. And I've been able to kind of be in that window of tolerance that's kind of an optimal level of arousal without being overly aroused or under aroused, but have been able to be in that place and do new paddles and go to new places I haven't seen. And I have to tell you that we've seen so many of the harbor seals. We've seen amazing birds. When we went out on Wednesday, we saw a pod of 5 dolphins. We saw a family of 7 harbor seals. It's amazing to be in these places and see things that you normally wouldn't see. Brenda and we launched from Coronado the other day, and seeing the Coronado Bridge from underneath the bridge, I mean, it's just amazing. And I still have to rumble with my fears and discomfort, and I can manage both of them. My hope is that in my recounting these stories of what goes on with me with kayaking, it's relevant to anything else that is going on for you in your life. I was just talking with a client who's interviewing for a position they've been temping. In this position, they're very highly valued, and they have an interview, and they were feeling really nervous and insecure, and all the interactions at work were being kind of perceived through this filter of fear and insecurity. And we talked about that's pretty average. And so, whether you're into kayaking or not, or it's interesting to you or not, the tools of walking through the fears and having to rumble with this stuff and to create calmness and security. I still, when I paddle, it's like, it's okay. You've got this. You're all right. I've got you. If you had a little mic or was sitting on my shoulder, you'd hear me when a big boat goes by or a cruise boat goes by and the wakes are really strong afterwards and I feel a little uncertain. You can hear me talking to myself. So are there areas in your life where you're wanting to grow and change and challenge yourself? And can you manage the discomfort, the fears, the gremlins, and to recognize that those are your fears and gremlins, and it's not the reality, it's not the truth. You don't have to be identified with it, and you can learn to balance both of those things. As we roll into this new year and say goodbye to 2021, what are the things that you're wanting more of? What do you want things to look like? And can you make some small changes, not major changes that you're not going to be able to maintain, but just have a vision for what is it that you would like things to look like a little bit more? Thank you so much for being with me on this year and following my journey from breaking my wrist and taking a pause and coming back, and my kayaking adventures and just everything. I'm so grateful for you and for being able to be in your ears every week if you're a regular listener. I just really appreciate you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.